Hello, everyone. I am joined by none other than the general manager of the Diablo franchise, Rod Fergusson. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come here and or to be here and to talk Diablo. First up, Vessel of Hatred has been out for a little over a month now.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about the state of the game right now?
State of the game right now. I feel really good. I mean, we've brought so much to the game. One of the things we've been talking about, we just got nominated for Best Ongoing Game for the Game Awards recently,
Yeah, congrats.
and so it was a great moment to sort of reflect on like where we were at launch of the main game, and the kind of 18 months ish it's been since then, and where we are today with season 6 and the Vessel of Hatred. And I feel really good. Like we've been able to really change how we listen, how we listen to players, how we talk to players. We've been constantly improving the game with every season, and so being here at season 6 with the new ways to play and all that other stuff that the expansion brings. And I think people who are, if they're playing Diablo, they'll be a little like spicy around like, what about the Spiritborn? And I'm like, yeah, people are having fun with the Spiritborn right now. Like it's a little overpowered because of certain things. And
Yeah.
and if somebody spends some money to have some fun, I don't want to take it away from them. So look, season 7 will be the time of making sure things are much more balanced. But it's a lot of fun right now.
Yeah, we will definitely be talking about balance in a minute, but you mentioned Spiritborn, and obviously when an expansion comes out and you have a brand new class, that's really exciting. When did those ideas start to come together behind the scenes? Like, when did you want to create this Spiritborn class?
Uh, I mean, that's the thing I think not everybody understands is like to get to the sort of schedule that we had, where we had season 1 6 weeks after launch, and we had the expansion, when we did, it's basically, whatever, 16 months after launch. That stuff has to all start beforehand. So we had people working on the seasons and people working on the expansion even before the main game had launched. And
Wow.
so that's part of just like having a big team, trying to get a lot of stuff done. And that's some of the challenges. That's why I think like one of the great things about having a live game is that every season we get feedback and we're able to, listen to what the players are saying and then kind of continue to adjust it. And that's what you see kind of where we feel like we're in a good spot, a really good spot with season 6. In terms of Spiritborn, yeah, it was, I don't know, it was definitely, it was early on in the ideation for the expansion. We knew like the expansion had, in its earliest form, had to have three things. It had to have story. We had to have a campaign. We wanted a new zone, and we wanted a new class. And so those were what we call the MVP, the minimum viable product. Like we're like, okay, these are at a minimum, it's these three things. And then of course we went on to add the Dark Citadel and the Chaos Undercity and ruins and mercenaries, and like, there's lots of other stuff layered into that. But those three things were the main core, what we call the MVP. And so that we thought about that a lot. And it really came from the Spiritborn itself, really came from a couple of places. And one was from a mechanics perspective. Like, what are the types of ways you play Diablo today? And we have a long range character, or we have a melee character, we have a magic character. Like, what is a different way to play? And so there's that notion of a bit of a summoner and trying to talk about like the different ways that you could do that. And then there was a click in terms of the way we think about the region. So our art director, John Mueller, was very much like, hey, we have a lot of Gothic medieval kind of architecture in the main game. I think it'd be really great if we as a team could kind of stretch our legs a little bit and do something that's visually
Yeah.
different. So,
So cool.
so what about an ancient jungle? And we're like, oh, that sounds really cool. And we're like, well, we just happen to have one. Like just to the south of the continent, we have
Yes.
with Cuirass and so in a place we call Nahantu. And so that notion of like as going to another place. And then once we had that idea of like, let's go to this ancient jungle, that's where we started to add the flavor in on the Spiritborn of like, well, if we want this type of play style, but we want it to feel cohesive as an expansion, like it came from Nahantu, what would that mean? And then we started talking about like the guardians, or at least the different elements of the jungle. And then it sort of kept clicking, even to the point where we were like, oh wait, like we're actually taking Mephisto's soulstone back to Kurast, which is where his soulstone
Yeah.
originated, right? And so it became this full circle moment for a lot of things. And so we were really excited about how that all kind of came together.
Yeah, was Mephisto always planned to come back for this expansion, or did that kind of just happen because you were talking about making the jungle, and then
No,
did all of that kind of
he
fall
was
into
always
place?
coming. No, he was always that we knew as we went in with to like as we talked about expansions, we knew we wanted
Yeah.
to. We had his daughter, and we knew that she was going to be the antagonist for the main game. And
Mhm.
then so it was really more about okay, like what's the next thing as we lead into expansions. And sometimes expansions can go into isolated, independent stories. And we thought it would be really cool if we could kind of just continue the main story to and have that kind of keep telling. So that was sort of the notion of oh, we see Narelle leave at the end of D4. Where is she going? What is she doing? Yeah, we defeated Lilith, but have we really dealt with the real problem? Because Lilith is really there to help in her own way defend
Yeah.
Sanctuary from the primevals. And so in some ways, yeah, you stopped the her own way part, but you still have to deal with the primeval part. And so that's where Mephisto came in. And so yeah, we've always been thinking about him.
That's awesome. Before we started, again, special shout out to Narelle. We were talking about her for a second. She
Such
was
a trooper.
she was so good in this expansion. Like one of the best character arcs in Diablo in recent memory for me. I loved it. I want to talk about balance for a minute.
Sure.
How, like, I am in awe always of just how you guys balance something like this.
Right.
And can you just tell us about that process and what different team members value when it comes to balance, and if there's any class bias? I'm sure all of you have your favorite classes, and
Right.
if that maybe gets in there at all.
I don't know, but yeah, I mean, the joke people know I have a necromancer tattoo, so they always anytime the necromancer is powerful, they think it's something I did because I wrote it on my tattoo. No, it's Diablo is I like to say Diablo is the kind of game that's too big for any one person. Like no one person can have it all in their head, and so that's why I always find funny when people say like, "Well, you did this or you did that." I'm like, I couldn't, even if I wanted to. Like, there's no way to hold all of this in your head when you take all the skills and all the legendary affixes and all the gear and all the monsters. Like, it's too much for one person, and so it takes a team to be able to do that. And I think one of the things we learned as part of our being in a live game is that we learned that we had to value balance differently, because when you're sort of in development, you're really focused on trying to get to kind of like a pure balance, like this idea that everybody's equal in some way. And so this notion, and so we're doing like lots of internal and external playtesting and alphas and betas on our way to launch. And then but you never know at scale what's going to happen. Like people always go like, well, how does the Spiritborn get to be what the Spiritborn is today? And you go, scale, like you give that to millions of people and they find things that maybe you didn't, just with your hundreds of people you didn't catch, or whatever, your thousands that tested it. And so it's so early on we were doing lots of testing, and what we were doing is very focused on like what's the pure balance. And so I think that's what happened when you look back at our history and going into season 1. It was like, okay, we're going into season 1, this is a great opportunity to balance the game based on all the feedback, the 6 weeks of feedback we have from the launch. And we kind of went in with what's the purity of the balance rather than what's the funness of the balance, if you will. And so
Yeah.
so we kind of went into season 1, and a lot of people were like, hey, like I'm way less powerful than I used to be, and da 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 da. And we're like, no, but we're making everybody equal. And they're like, yeah, but no, this part isn't as fun anymore. And you're like, yeah, that's a really good call out. Like we've been so tuning for ourselves for so long that we have to, once your game goes live, you have to think about, like, it's essentially you've given the game to the player, and so you have to sort of say like, okay, how do I tune for them, and how do I balance for them? And so we had to start changing our philosophy around, hey, if something's overpowered, is it breaking something? Like, because we've had something actually, like, if you do it, you could bring down a server. So we're like, okay, we have to fix that. Like, you can't have, 1,000 dust devils going out of the barbarian whirlwind. Like we just can't do that. As fun as it is, like you can't see anything, and it's going to bring down our servers. So you have to go like we have to fix that. But then there's ones where there's just like, like Spiritborn is a good example today. Like the Spiritborn can hit for a lot of damage, and but it's not breaking the like our servers or anything. For some people, it's like, oh, okay, like they're just very strong. And so we have to go like, yeah, but people paid for that. It paid to have fun, and they're having fun. And for us to go like, no, 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 that you're having too much fun. Let's turn it down. Like there's times that you have to like. That's why we sort of give ourselves two opportunities. One is the we call it a mid-season patch. So we go like, okay, the middle of the season is a good time because what you don't want is somebody working towards a build and every week their build is changing because we're behind the scenes, like, flipping switches and turning knobs. And so what you want is some sort of certainty of like, oh, at least for the first half, I feel good about what is going to be going on, unless it's truly broken. And then there's a moment where we go like, okay, like we just recently did our mid-season patch for season 6, and we didn't fundamentally change. Like the Spiritborn is still the Spiritborn. But then we go like, okay, but then the start of a new season is another opportunity where we can say, okay, let's look at the meta, who's succeeding, who's not, or what, because we do want every class to have builds that can be sort of what they call S tier. And so when we go and say like, oh, hey, last season the Druid never really got to S tier. Let's talk about that, and what do we need to do for the Druid players out there so they can find their S tier build. And so, but it's hard because people want instantaneous, and then you get into like you're just swinging things so wildly that you can't kind of keep up with it. Because we've had things literally stuff happen where they're like, the Barbarian's the weakest thing ever, and you're like, okay, like sorry, like, well, look at mid-season, and like 2 weeks later they'll be like, they figure something out, and then it's like the Barbarian is unstoppable. Like
we're too strong.
Yeah, like what are you going to do to nerf it? And you're like, what are you talking about? Like 2 weeks you told us like it would, And so you have to let stuff like settle and people live with it for a while. But yeah, no, there isn't really class bias to go to sort of the other parts of your question. What we're looking at, and actually one of the great things about the pit is that the pit has become this great barometer of class success so that people can go like, hey, a Spiritborn can get to pit level 150. As a Barbarian, I can only get to pit level 100. Maybe there's something there, and you're like, oh, that's and then the Druid got to 96, and you're like, okay, like this is a great way to, even though it's not perfect, it is an interesting way to kind of take a measurement of, are there builds in each class that can kind of do the pit thing.
Yeah, the pendulum swings, I can imagine, and just like anytime you introduce like a new mechanic or a new type of dungeon, or
totally, and
you gotta like refiddle with everything.
Well, yeah, and our seasons, like a lot of our seasons are based on what we call borrowed power. So if you look at season 2, like that was the borrowing the vampire power, right? Like, and so I've been playing season 7, which it wasn't coming out till like January 21st, I think. But season 7 is also a borrowed power kind of season, and when you do that, you're like, well, here goes the meta, because like there's a bunch of new skills and a bunch of new things that classes could do, that when they combine it with their other parts of their skills and their Paragon tree, all of a sudden it's this Pandora's box of things that can happen. And so, we test it a lot, we play it a lot, but there's always aha, if I do this, and this, all of a sudden, wow, okay, like we might have missed that one, kind of thing. So
I love that.
It's kind of what makes Diablo in a way. Like I find that most fun you have playing Diablo is kind of when you feel like you've outsmarted the game in some way, or that
you try to break it.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's that power curve thing, because you get that thing where you're like, oh, I'm going power, and then it's like you hit some thing that where you drop back down, and then all of a sudden you get this other power, and you're stomping everything, and you feel wonderful. And it's that notion where you go like, oh, I found this thing, or I got this piece of loot, or I figured out this skill use that then all of a sudden makes this whole thing make sense. And that to me is like, that's why I had to actually explain to something. We had the notion of something being broke, in video game terminology. Like if you're a hardcore gamer, when somebody goes like, oh, that Barbarian, that class is broke, and then you go like, oh, that sounds awesome, I'm gonna go play that, because that means it's like overpowered, or it's really fun. And so but when like I had a person one time who was not a hardcore gamer, and they were like, I keep hearing there's a problem with the Barbarian, it seems to be broken. And I'm like, no, that's not really what they're trying to say to you right now. And actually means they're having a lot of fun with it because they feel like they broke the game. And so,
It's like when something
okay.
is sick. It's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any? Are there any struggles between story and gameplay, like things the story team wants to do, or things that the gameplay and balance teams want to do that maybe they conflict? Or does one come first, or is that more of a collaboration?
It's definitely a collaboration. I don't think,
Yeah.
we try to ring fence the story pretty well. So you kind of have to get through the story
Mhm.
before a lot of the seasonal stuff kicks in, just in case. So that
Yeah.
was especially early on. Like we've done a little bit more overlap when you look at the expansion and the realm walkers walking around and stuff like that. But when you go back and
Yeah.
play the original game and like the when we were doing like season two or season three, like vampire powers, like
Yeah.
you couldn't play the main campaign and have vampire powers because it would totally like trying to rebalance the whole campaign was going to be a nightmare every time.
Yeah.
So we do a little bit of separation there. We did one of the things I really liked that we did is we brought the Spiritborn to the main campaign. So you can choose not only to play the expansion as any class you want, but you can also go back and play the original campaign as any class as well as the Spiritborn because we re-recorded all the lines for the Spiritborn character. So it all makes
So
sense
awesome.
to that as well, right? But no, I mean we just look hand in hand and as we think about I always think of like Diablo's two games. I think of it as a
Mhm.
campaign story game, and then I think of it as like depending on how hardcore you are, it's the 100-hour game or it's the 1,000-hour
Yeah.
game,
The forever
the
game.
forever game, right? And so you have to look at like, okay, what are we doing that is the campaign and story game? Because we know there's some people who want to roll credits, and that's all they want to do. And then we have the what you call the forever game, which are the people who are like, I want to be playing, forever. And how do we make sure we have enough end game variety and things to go do to increase your progression? And the reason we do seasons so that you can get that progression loop going again. And that's where I feel like we've hit a sweet spot with season six, or with the expansion, is adding the Cuirass Undercity and now the first co-op experience, which is the Dark Citadel, means that now I find that when I like before when you're early on, it was like this is the three things I have to do to level up to get to level
Mhm.
max level. And now I find myself like standing in town going, Infernal Horde, the
Yeah.
pit, Unearned
Yeah.
City, like Nightmare Dungeon, like what is
Grind some nightmare
yeah,
dungeons for
like do I want to
resources.
go to
Like, what am I gonna
Helltide and kill a
do?
Blood Maiden? Like is it like there's actually like this wide array, and it's like what do I feel like right now?
Yeah.
So now you can actually like, I feel like kind of just like destroying Helltide right now and going after cinders, and that's great. And or I want to go play with my friend cooperatively in Dark Citadel. Like there's lots of choice, and I feel like with when we launched Special of Hatred, we kind of got to that place where and I think you see it in the reviews. People go like, "Oh, this is the best D4's ever been," because you
Yeah.
really
I
feel
agree.
like the end game is there now, and it's understood, and there's a lot of variety and choice there.
Yeah. From Loot Reborn into Vessel of Hatred. What a nice
Mm.
little run right now. Yeah, Diablo 4 feels so good right now.
Well, yeah, and that's we actually had thanks for that, but we actually had to like we looked at that closely because we with season four is Loot Reborn, what you just talked about,
Mhm.
and then season six is kind of Progression Reborn, if you will, but we didn't want to call it
Yeah.
that. But if you look at like Loot 2.0 and Progression 2.0, we were like, if you're an eternal player, somebody who's there to just play the campaign, or maybe you don't like to reset on the seasons,
Mhm.
because we changed things so fundamentally in those two seasons, when you log in and you look at your inventory, you're seeing red skulls on your gear because it's no longer supported. You're got
Mhm.
an exclamation mark next to your character because there's things you need to fix. And so we're just like, you know what, we need to find a way to bring people back in a very smooth way. And so we actually just
Yeah.
created this welcome back booster. So if as an internal player, you can come into the game, you go talk to this one vendor, and you become level 50, which is basically the max level without the expansion. You get you pick a build, and so you tell what, like, I want to be a whirlwind barbarian. It gives you a bunch of equipment that supports whirlwind barbarian, and it
Yeah.
gives you a bunch of renown. Like it claims all of the Lilith altars, and it gives you a bunch of currency for masterworking and tempering. And so
Wow.
it's just like this great, like before when you come in, you're like, okay, I'd love to fire up Diablo 4 again. Oh, I guess I got to take 30 minutes or an hour to
Yeah, a
clean
little
up.
overwhelming.
Yeah, and you got like empty my inventory, junk everything, find new
Yeah.
skills, da 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 da, make my build again. And now you can just go in and go click and go duk duk duk, and then you're like, oh, I'm back in 5 minutes, and now I can. Yeah, I still have to get rid of some stuff, but I have a playable, viable build that is immediately progressing in 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
so I'm hopeful that some people who maybe, played the main campaign and said like, I don't want to reset in the season, will can come
Yeah.
back and check out, because Loot 2.0 and Progression 2.0 and all the stuff we've taken like Helltide into Eternal and everything, that's Diablo 4 is a much different game than it launched 18
Yeah.
months ago, and it's a great time to jump in.
Yeah, those boosters, it reminds me of like World of Warcraft or Hearthstone, just like coming back and making it as
I'd be
easy as
lying.
possible to re-onboard, I guess.
Totally. No, I mean they're like
Yeah.
a sister team. I'd be lying if I didn't say like someone at some point going like, well, you know that what WoW does, right? And you're like, yeah, that'd be a cool idea. We should do something like that. So yeah.
uh, how has something like a battle pass and just like the state of modern gaming with seasons and battle passes and all that, how has that affected the Diablo franchise? Or how has that impacted it at all?
I mean, it's just part of the way you think about what does it mean to be kind of a live service in a way.
Hmm.
It's kind of the things I like to say to the team is that, an ARPG or ARPG is a tough one for me because right now almost any game is called an ARPG, and so I'd, I'd like to, the way that we say things are Souls-like or roguelike, I kind of want to call
Yeah.
a game a Diablo-like. Right, like
Yeah.
because it's like I
Yeah.
think there's a difference between an ARPG necessarily and the sort of isometric sort of Diablo-like game.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but with a Diablo-like game, like you're going to have that forever game whether you want it or not, in a way, right? Like, and so the game is going to live beyond your rolling credits. Nobody just and so the question is like, what do you do with that? And so and so the notion of seasons being like, hey, what you love is progression. Let's give you a fresh way to start progression. And then you go like, well, how can we make that more interesting and novel? Then you go like, oh, let's do borrowed power and all those sorts of things. Then you go like, well, I mean, a great way to do progression as well, as we all know, battle pass can drive progression and engagement, but it can also help with like, hey, in order to have a vampire season and a malignant season and whatever, like I have to have a bunch of people making the seasons interesting and novel, and that's part of what battle pass allows for as well. But it's also a cool
I
um,
love the perspective.
way to like just have people engaged and going after sort of things they can unlock for free, because like I think it's like a third of our battle pass is
Yeah.
essentially free, that you can get cool gear
The
and
pirate stuff
stuff.
is awesome.
Yeah, so oh yeah.
I really like the portal, the town portal pirate one with
Right.
like the skeletons and the gold. I love that one. That's so cool.
Yeah, no, there's some cool stuff in there for sure.
Almost done here. Is there anything that you weren't able to do that you wanted to do? Anything left on the cutting room floor that you can talk about?
Oh, those generally don't go well as conversations, because then
Okay,
everybody goes
okay.
like, well, that's the thing I really wanted the most.
Yeah, fair enough,
But
fair
I mean,
enough.
I think the thing that what you have to think about is like we're supporting Diablo for years to come, and so that's the thing I like about a live game is that when I worked on previous titles, if you're shipping what we call a box product, like this is a like roll of credits and done kind of game, when you're making sort of trade-offs or what we call triage, and you're saying like, okay, this is going to fit this, where this is going to be ready, you would have to be like, you know, prior, because you're like, this never coming back. We're cutting it from the game and it's never coming back. And the nice thing is we have stuff that like we go, oh, it's not going to fit in the box initially, but we have seasons and we can bring it back. I think our big one I'm really most excited about. I don't even know if it's out yet. This is the funny thing. So Nick is cringing now, which I love, which is my PR guy who's listening. But like when I review all the blogs and stuff, and so once you review all the blogs, it kind of feels like we told everybody, even though the blog hasn't been published
Yeah,
yet. Because I'm like, we're going to say it at some point. So like, is now the time I get to say it or not? But so anyway, to make Nick's jobs harder, like what I love is what we're bringing in is we're bringing the Armoury in season 7. And so that's something that players have really wanted, this ability to have a class that where they can go and say, hey, I took my necromancer to max level, and I love that it's a minion necromancer, but I really want to do a blood necromancer. And in some cases, I know I have done it. I've rolled a new necromancer and leveled it all the way to max as well. So I had 2 necromancers.
yeah,
But
yeah.
now with the Armoury, you can actually store off your gear and your skill tree and all that stuff so that you can swap builds with the character you
Awesome.
have. And so bringing the Armoury, it's a highly requested feature. And
Yeah,
it's something that we really worked hard to try to bring it as soon as we could. And season 7 is that season. So I'm really looking forward to bringing the Armoury to the players. Sorry,
that's
sorry,
awesome.
Nick.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I get so overwhelmed with like respecking,
Mm.
and I just like won't because I'm just like, oh, I don't want to like mess with 40 or 50 skill points. I'm just gonna just keep going with it. But yeah, if you're able to just like quickly swap out those loadouts, if you will, that's awesome.
Well, yeah, especially for me because like I like um pretty much every season I start with a homebrew. Like I start with like what inspires me. Like I still continue to this day to try to make a thorn necro a thing. Like, and so but there's no guide.
Thorn's so cool. I love Thorn.
Nobody's made a thorn necro guide. So it's not like there's some repository of knowledge where I can go and so when I make my thorn necro and I try it out and I'm like, yeah, it's doing pretty well. Then they go like, oh, but the S tier this season is the blood necro, and I'm like, oh, I'd like to at least feel what that feels like. But then I'm like, oh, but I like. Do I take pictures of my Paragon tree on my TV so I don't forget my homebrew, right?
Yep.
And so the notion of being able to put that in the armory and go like, okay, necro thorns, you're in the armory, now I'll go try the blood, and okay, you're in the armory, let me go try bone or whatever. Like I just love that flexibility that we're bringing in season 7.
That's so great. Lastly, I mean, I was gonna ask for any teases of the future, but you beat me
I just
to it
did
with
it,
the
yeah.
armory. It's so awesome. And what is your goal now? We have Diablo 4 the base. We have a nice expansion here. We're really in the thick of Diablo 4. What is the next step? What do you want?
Oh, I mean, I just want to keep people playing and keep bringing in more people. That's one of the things. The other nomination we got was around innovation and accessibility, and I always think of accessibility as it's a journey, not a destination. I don't think anybody ever in the history of time has ever gone, well, that's enough accessibility. We're done. Like, and
totally.
so the notion that we continue, pretty much every season, we try to find ways to continue to build upon what we have is something I'm excited about because it opens up the game for more people. I think we went, when we launched, after, I don't know, 6 or 9 months after launch, I don't think anybody had completed the game who was sightless independently. They had like somebody coaching them or telling them certain things. But now there's been like, I think somewhere in the area of 28 to 30 blind players have been able to complete Diablo. And because of the tools we've added in for them. And what you tend to find, it's that old story is like when you add something in for accessibility, it actually helps more than just the people you were designing for. It's like subtitles. Like I'm sure when they designed subtitles for people who had a hearing disability, they weren't thinking about a bunch of people in the gym on treadmills, watching the news, right? Like and so this notion of this like design for one and expand to many is a big thing. And I think every time we do something to improve our accessibility, I think of it beyond I'm grateful we're able to help the person it's targeted for, but I kind of feel like I know that we're going beyond that. Even to my example is we added an ability to put a shader on your character to separate it from the background. And there are oftentimes I'll be like, I put that shader on so I can see my character amongst all those demons.
All the exploding demons.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's a great, it makes the experience better for me, but it wasn't designed for me, and so that's what I think is really cool.
That is very, very awesome. What a great way to end it on that note. I love that. Rod, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Seriously, I know you got a lot going on. You're super busy, so thank you so much for joining. We are Easy Allies. Thanks so much for watching. Diablo 4, Vessel of Hatred. Go play it!
Take care.